I once believed that my life was a steady, unbreakable routine of love, loyalty, and unwavering trust. My name is Michael, and for years I built my world around the ideals of family and honor. I had a devoted wife named Emily who filled our home with laughter and warmth. We shared dreams and built a future together that, to outsiders, appeared flawless. I was proud of the life we had created and the strong family bonds that held us together. I looked up to my grandfather, Arthur, a man of wisdom and dignity who had guided our family for generations. I respected him and believed that his presence in our lives was a blessing. I never imagined that the very person I trusted would become the center of an unimaginable betrayal. For as long as I can remember, Emily and I had lived in what I thought was a perfect world. Our days were filled with shared meals, quiet evenings at home, and plans for the future. I worked hard to provide stability and security, and I took pride in the life we had built together. But over time, I began to notice subtle changes in Emily. At first, it was just a fleeting distraction in her eyes when we talked. I would catch her looking away for a moment or smile as if she were remembering something distant. I assumed it was nothing more than the weariness of a busy life. Then, one day, I began to notice that these moments were happening more often. During family gatherings, Emily would seem oddly distant at times. I observed that when she was alone with Arthur, her smile took on a secretive quality. They shared glances that were far too warm and intimate to be described as the simple affection between a granddaughter and her grandfather. I tried to tell myself that I was reading too much into things. I trusted Emily with all my heart, and I trusted that our family was strong enough to weather any storm. One rainy evening, I returned home earlier than usual from work. I had been looking forward to a quiet dinner with Emily, expecting nothing more than the familiar comfort of our routine. When I stepped inside our house, I felt an immediate change in the air. The warm chatter and light laughter that usually greeted me were absent. Instead, there was a silence that seemed to press against the walls. I made my way to the living room, where I saw Emily and Arthur seated together on the sofa. They were close in a way that made my heart pound and my mind race with doubts. Their voices were soft and secretive as they exchanged glances that I could no longer ignore. I stood in the doorway, frozen with a mix of disbelief and growing horror. My heart pounded as I retreated silently, feeling as if the ground beneath me had shifted. I had always believed in the sanctity of our family. I had trusted Emily with everything, and I had admired Arthur for the wisdom he imparted to me. Yet here they were, sharing a moment that shattered everything I thought I knew. That night, I lay awake in the darkness of our bedroom. The images of that moment played over and over in my mind. I remembered the way Emily's hand had brushed against Arthur's and the secretive glances that had passed between them. Every tender memory we had shared now felt tainted by the realization that something was deeply, irreparably wrong. I began to wonder how long this betrayal had been simmering beneath the surface of our seemingly perfect life. I questioned every interaction, every smile, every whispered conversation I had once taken for granted. In the days that followed, my inner world began to crumble. I would catch fleeting moments where Emily seemed lost in thought, as if she were hiding something from me. The warmth in her eyes, which had once reassured me, now left me cold with suspicion. I turned to my journal, pouring out every painful thought and memory. I documented the small details, the lingering looks, the hushed tones, and the moments that now reeked of secrecy. Each word on that page was a reminder that the foundation of our life together was cracking, that our love was being undermined by a betrayal too cruel to imagine. I took long walks alone in the early mornings, hoping that the fresh air would clear the dark thoughts clouding my mind. I strolled through quiet streets and along the river, searching for answers in the solitude of nature. But no matter where I went, I could not escape the image of Emily and Arthur together. The betrayal was like a wound that throbbed with every beat of my heart, a pain that refused to be silenced. I knew that I could no longer pretend that everything was as it once had been. The signs were too clear, the evidence too undeniable. My once perfect world was crumbling, and the thought of confronting Emily and Arthur terrified me. I wrestled with a tormenting mixture of denial and despair. How could I, a man who had built his life on trust and honor, come to face a betrayal of this magnitude? I questioned not only the actions of those I loved, but also my own judgment for not seeing the truth sooner. At last, I reached a point where I knew I had no choice but to confront the situation. The seeds of betrayal had been sown, and the time for inaction had passed. I braced myself for the inevitable confrontation, a moment that would force me to face the truth, no matter how painful it might be. That night, as I stared into the darkness with a heavy heart, I vowed that I would seek the truth. I would no longer hide behind a facade of normalcy while the family I cherished crumbled before my eyes. This is where my story truly begins, a journey into the depths of betrayal and heartbreak. The perfect facade I had believed in was shattered, and in its place lay a reality more brutal and unforgiving than I had ever imagined. In the days that followed that terrible revelation, my life was plunged into a state of unbearable torment. Every moment became a painful reminder of the betrayal that had ruptured my world. I was caught in an endless cycle of anger and sorrow, my every thought consumed by the image of Emily and Arthur together. The memory of that rainy evening haunted me, replaying in my mind with every breath I took. I began to isolate myself from everyone around me. The comfort of home turned into a prison, where every room whispered secrets of deceit. I avoided family gatherings and retreated from social events, unable to face the looks of pity or the judgment I felt in every glance. At work, my concentration faltered as I struggled to maintain a semblance of normalcy. My colleagues noticed the dark circles under my eyes and the haunted expression that had become my constant companion. Yet, despite their well-intentioned concern, I found it impossible to share the burden of my grief with anyone. In the solitude of my apartment, I turned to my journal again, desperate to make sense of the pain that now defined my every day. I scrawled down every detail of my shattered reality, the whispered conversations I had once ignored, the secret smiles exchanged in the shadows, and the painful recognition that my wife, the woman I had loved so deeply, had chosen a path that betrayed every vow we had made to one another. I questioned everything I had believed in. I questioned my own worth and the nature of love itself. How could the one person I trusted implicitly do something so unimaginable? The betrayal left me numb and shattered. I wandered the streets at night, feeling as if I were adrift in a sea of despair. The cool night air did little to soothe the burning ache in my heart. Every street lamp, every quiet corner, seemed to echo the memories of what had been lost. I could not escape the relentless torment of that fateful night, and every step I took felt like a painful reminder of the life that had been stolen from me. Despite the overwhelming darkness, a small, stubborn ember of determination began to flicker within me. I knew that I could not remain trapped in this abyss forever. I had to find a way to face the truth, to understand how my world had unraveled so completely. I began to make tentative plans to confront Emily and Arthur. The thought of the confrontation filled me with both dread and a desperate need for resolution. I needed to know why this betrayal had happened, even if the truth might only bring further pain. I spent long hours searching for answers, piecing together every memory and every conversation. I recalled the times when Emily seemed distant, the inexplicable sighs, and the way her eyes would soften whenever Arthur was near. I realized that there had been signs that I had once brushed aside in my desire to believe in the perfection of our life. The realization was devastating. I felt betrayed not only by their actions, but by my own inability to see what was unfolding before my eyes. Every day, as I navigated this painful new reality, I found myself torn between a desire for retribution and a longing for understanding. I questioned whether the love we once shared could ever be salvaged, or if it had been irreparably destroyed by the choices made by those I trusted most. I was caught in a whirlwind of conflicting emotions, rage, sorrow, confusion, and a deep-seated despair that threatened to engulf me. Yet amid the crushing weight of my grief, I knew that I had to move forward. The path ahead was shrouded in uncertainty, but I could not allow myself to remain a prisoner of my own heartache. I began to muster the courage to confront the inevitable. I resolved that the time for denial had passed, and that I would face the truth, no matter how painful it might be. It was a decision born of desperation and the faint hope that, perhaps, by understanding the roots of this betrayal, I could begin to heal. That night, as I sat alone at my desk with the soft glow of a single lamp illuminating the worn pages of my journal, I made a promise to myself. I would not let this betrayal define me completely. I would find the strength to confront the darkness, to bring the truth into the light, and to reclaim whatever remained of my shattered identity. Though the road ahead seemed endless and fraught with despair, I knew that I had no choice but to walk it. I was now at the edge of an abyss, a chasm of heartbreak and disbelief. The life I once knew had been ripped away, replaced by a reality that was more painful than I could have ever imagined. And yet, Even in the depths of that despair, I clung to the hope that one day I might rise again. That hope was fragile, but it was the only light in a world that had turned overwhelmingly dark. The day I had dreaded had finally arrived. The sky was overcast, and a chill hung in the air, mirroring the frost that had taken root in my heart. I returned home that afternoon with a heavy resolve and a determination forged in the long, agonizing nights of solitude. I knew that the time for silence was over and that I must confront the two people responsible for tearing my world apart. Every step toward the living room felt like an eternity. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest as I approached the space that had once been a sanctuary of love. There, I found them, Emily and Arthur, seated together on the sofa. Their heads were close as they whispered to one another in soft, conspiratorial tones. In that moment, the weight of their betrayal crashed over me like a tidal wave. I stood there in the doorway, struggling to steady my trembling hands and my racing thoughts. My mind was a whirlwind of conflicting emotions, rage, sorrow, and a desperate need for answers. I cleared my throat, and in a voice that was raw with pain, I demanded, "How long has this been going on?" My words cut through the heavy silence like a knife, leaving the room frozen in shock. Emily's eyes widened with a mix of guilt and terror. I could see the fear in her expression, a silent admission of the secrets that had been hidden behind her gentle smile. Arthur looked at me with an expression of deep regret, his features etched with sorrow as if he knew that the moment of reckoning had finally come. For what felt like a lifetime, I stood there, searching their faces for any clue that might offer an explanation for the unthinkable. Emily was the first to speak, her voice trembling as she attempted to explain. She told me of the loneliness that had crept into her heart over the years, of the deep isolation she had felt despite the trappings of a happy marriage. She spoke of a void that she had desperately tried to fill, and of how Arthur had, in his own way, offered her a sense of understanding and solace. Her words were a jumble of apologies and fragmented justifications that did little to ease the crushing pain I felt. Arthur, in his quiet, sorrowful manner, added his own confession. He spoke of regrets that spanned decades, of moments when he had felt isolated by the weight of his own memories. He admitted that his connection with Emily had grown from simple sympathy to something far more dangerous and forbidden. His voice was soft and full of remorse as he acknowledged that he had crossed a line that no one should ever cross. The room seemed to shrink as I listened, my mind unable to reconcile the loving figures I had once trusted with the betrayal that now lay bare before me. Every word they spoke was like a dagger to my heart. I felt the crushing weight of their confessions, each sentence confirming the horror that had haunted me for so long. The living room, once a space of comfort and family togetherness, had transformed into a stage for a betrayal so profound that it threatened to erase every good memory I had ever cherished. Unable to bear the intensity of the moment any longer, I managed to choke out, "I need space." My voice cracked with the sheer magnitude of my despair. I turned and fled from that room, my legs carrying me out into the bitter afternoon as the weight of betrayal threatened to shatter me completely. Outside, the wind howled as if mourning the loss of everything I once held dear. I wandered aimlessly through the streets, my thoughts a chaotic jumble of anger, sorrow, and disbelief. Every step I took felt like I was leaving behind not just a home, but a future that had been irrevocably stolen from me. That day marked the beginning of my journey away from the life I once knew. The confrontation had laid bare the ugly truth, and there was no turning back. I was left with a profound sense of loss, a loss that went beyond the physical absence of love to the very essence of my identity. I questioned how I could ever trust again, how I could rebuild a life when the foundation itself had crumbled. In the solitude of that agonizing day, I vowed that I would find the strength to reclaim my identity, to rebuild my shattered world from the fragments of betrayal. I knew that the road ahead would be long and painful, but I also knew that the only way to heal was to face the darkness head-on. Even as tears blurred my vision, I resolved that I would no longer let this betrayal define every aspect of my existence. In the months that followed the confrontation, I set out on the long and arduous journey of healing. I left behind the home that had once been my sanctuary and moved into a modest apartment on the outskirts of town. The space was small and bare, yet it provided me with the solitude I needed to begin mending the shattered pieces of my soul. Every day was a struggle as I worked to understand the depths of my pain and learn how to live with the scars left behind by a betrayal I never thought possible. I sought the help of a therapist and attended support groups for those who had experienced deep personal betrayals. In these sessions, I slowly began to learn that healing was not a linear process. I learned that the journey toward redemption was filled with setbacks and moments of doubt, but that each small step forward was a victory in itself. I began to write again, pouring my raw emotions onto paper and chronicling every painful memory alongside every glimmer of hope that emerged from the darkness. My journal became a lifeline, a way to externalize the agony and, in doing so, begin to understand that the betrayal, as devastating as it was, did not entirely define me. I spent long afternoons reflecting on the happier times of my past. I recalled the laughter, the shared dreams, and even the quiet moments of tenderness that once filled my life with promise. Each memory was bittersweet, a reminder of what had been lost and what might never be regained. But slowly, I began to see that those moments, though marred by the present pain, were still part of who I was. I had to accept that the betrayal had changed my life forever, yet it did not erase the love and goodness that had once defined it. Eventually, a tentative meeting was arranged, a final attempt at closure with Emily and Arthur. We met in a small, neutral cafe where the anonymity of the setting allowed us to speak freely without the overwhelming weight of past memories. Over hours of hesitant conversation and tearful confessions, we each confronted our own roles in the tragic unfolding of events. Emily expressed deep remorse for the pain she had caused, admitting that her loneliness and unmet desires had led her astray. Arthur, with quiet sorrow, accepted responsibility for his part in a forbidden romance that he now recognized as a grave mistake. For my part, I spoke of the profound hurt and betrayal that had shattered the foundation of my trust. The meeting was agonizing, and though no simple resolution was reached, it marked a small step toward releasing the grip of the past. Returning from that meeting, I felt a tentative lightness begin to pierce the darkness. The scars of betrayal remained, but I began to see that they did not have to dictate the rest of my life. I started to rebuild old friendships, return to hobbies that once brought me joy, and slowly, piece by piece, reconstruct a life that honored both my past and the promise of a new future. I learned that forgiveness was not a destination but a process, a gradual release of the bitterness that had consumed me for so long. Now, as I sit in the quiet of my modest apartment and reflect on the tumultuous events that reshaped my world, I see a man who has been irrevocably changed by the unthinkable betrayal. The forbidden love between my wife and my grandfather shattered everything I believed in, forcing me to confront the darkest corners of my heart. And yet, in that confrontation, I discovered a resilience within myself that I never knew existed. I now understand that even in the face of the most devastating betrayal, the human spirit can find a way to rise again, slowly, painfully, but surely. This is my story, a chronicle of love turned to sorrow, trust betrayed, and the long, winding road toward redemption. I have learned that behind every shattered facade lies the potential for rebirth. I have learned that the darkness of betrayal can, over time, give way to the soft light of hope. Though the past will forever be a part of me, I choose to move forward, forging a future defined not by the mistakes of others but by my own capacity to heal and find peace.